Hi everybody, Greg here from the Joanne Rheinauer, sitting at anchor up here in the Hudson River. Trying to use iMovie here to create something that hopefully you guys will enjoy to present my lesson plan to incorporate Robert Marzano's 5 Dimensions of Learning into said lesson plan. And what I've kind of worked out here is the fact that I plan on teaching high school English, so thinking of a 10th grade journalism unit, and what the end result of this unit will be each group of students, so we'll do some group work. Each group of students will basically produce a short newspaper with op-eds and just straight factual pieces, reporting some investigative journalism, to look at the whole subject of petroleum transportation, whether it's by the water, seeing that I'm sitting on a tugboat that does just that right now, and and also looking into the recent controversial pipelines and pipeline spills and breaches. And so the end result will be, it'll involve some technology. Students doing some desktop publishing to create their newspapers, so they'll have to bring that aspect into it. Imagine that this class is going to be taught at a school that is willing to integrate between the classes, because there's some experiments here with fluid dynamics that'll use to prove some points here. Some pipeline with some built-in flaws. You'll see as I explain it. Where I'll start is the declarative knowledge that students will need to learn, and I think I have this pretty organized. But as I do move through my explanation of this unit, there will be other bits and pieces from different dimensions that I'll have to add in, and hopefully, as Mary Jo says, they'll be as clear as mud. So the declarative knowledge is obviously going to have a lot to do with, one, journalism. So we'll go over the who's, what's, why's, where's, and when's, the 5 essential questions of journalism. And how we'll do that is everybody will bring in a newspaper, or I'll provide newspapers if somebody can't come up with one. We'll acquire newspapers somehow, and read through those newspapers and break down the bits and pieces into those 5 questions: who, what, where, when, why. And we'll discuss why those are important. We'll also discuss there's some things that people will need to know, just basic information about petroleum transportation, like what a barge is, what a tugboat is, some brief discussions on navigation, tankers versus tug and barge, how the terminal operates, how pipelines operate, transportation of petroleum products via the waterways rather than via trucks or trains. And then there's some other regulatory type things, like there's a gauger and an inspector that's involved with every single transfer to make sure the product is in fact what you're trying to pass from one place to another, and exactly how much of it is, and go through to make sure it's the right stuff and the right amount of it. So there's all of that stuff. The experience that I was thinking to help the students construct, meaning, organize, and store this declarative knowledge would be a field trip to an oil terminal. There's, right around the corner in South Portland there's those oil tanks. And also going over to visit Portland Tugboat, and speaking to the guys that run those tugboats. You find that these people are very willing to talk about what they do and how they do it. So we'll talk to a gauger, we'll talk to an inspector, we'll talk to a tugboat captain. Hopefully we can track down a tanker man, which is the name of the person that does this. And through that experience, and then coming back to the class and writing a news article about the trip to the terminal or the tugboat, that'll be the first piece that kind of goes into this newspaper, which will kind of act as a portfolio that students can look at at the end or throughout the process and gauge how they're figuring out how this whole thing works. So that's going to be the beginnings of our Dimension 2, looking over that declarative knowledge. So they'll have the process of journalism, and then the kind of a working knowledge of the subject that they're trying to tackle in their reporting. All right, so now we move on to the second part of Dimension 2, which is the procedural knowledge, acquiring and integrating the procedural knowledge. And so what I was thinking, so the procedure of writing a story about the field trip would be part of the procedural knowledge, and that pretty much speaks for itself, where it'll take that information that they've learned and help them go through the process of writing a story. So with some guided instruction on how to write a story, maybe part of our field trip could involve visiting, either visiting the Portland Press Herald or having someone from the Press Herald come to the school and give a brief talk about just basic journalism. Some other bits and pieces of procedural knowledge that I think will be important in helping to write about this process, and this is where that integrated high school concept will come into it. Going over the transfer process, just how fluids are moved from one place to another, and also a navigation project, figuring out how a tugboat can go from one place to another. We'll do a basic land navigation project experience model, if you will, to demonstrate that. But first, let me talk about the transfer process. Basically, there's pipes and pumps and containers. For a small amount of money, I can get all that stuff at Lowe's or Home Depot, and set up something where we're just simply moving a liquid from one place to another via pipes and pumps. So what I'll do is I'll obviously design and practice at home an experiment, and so I'll bring in the bits and pieces after I figure out exactly how it's going to work, and have the students in groups build their own kind of terminal transfer station. So they'll have one container that will be the barge, and another container that will be the terminal, and the pipes will go from one place to another. And we'll also maybe do a long pipeline. We'll do it outside and maybe build in some flaws beforehand, so that the issue of a pipeline leaking will be evident, and maybe coming up with some solutions as to how or why that happened. So this procedural knowledge of transferring fluids from one place to another, whether it's from terminal to tugboat or via pipeline, it'll pretty much be cemented in their minds how that process could work, and if we build in some flaws, how that could go wrong, and what sort of issues could arise if that pipeline was full of something other than, we'll use maybe colored water. But if the pipeline was full of, something more toxic to the environment, I think it'll give them a pretty good understanding of how that whole thing works. The navigation experiment that I was thinking of, because that's going to be a big part of marine transportation, is you can't, you have to move the barge through enough water. There needs to be enough water underneath the barge. You can safely move it to one place, from one place to another, without bumping into rocks or anything, which would poke a hole in it, which would cause a huge oil spill. And I think we've all seen the news footage from a couple of years ago down in the Gulf of Mexico as to what that oil spill can look like, or if, actually, I don't know if anybody else in the class is quite old enough to remember seeing video footage of the Exxon Valdez. But those are the things that we'll do here. And the navigation project will basically be I'll make up a chart of the school grounds. A basic chart with a starting point and an end point, and there will be places that we can't go based on certain restrictions like how deep the water is, or currents maybe work in some tide problems into there, which will affect how the boat handles in certain conditions. So I think those will be some two pretty good, three actually, with the actually writing of the story, which will be a procedural knowledge point. The transfer process and the navigation process will help students really understand what they're about to write about. Okay, so as we move on to Dimension 3 here, extending and refining knowledge, I got a couple of different activities planned. One of them would be, this being a literature class, might as well get some reading in as we're doing this. One is going to be an abstracting exercise, where I'll have the students read either the whole entirety of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, depending on how long this unit is going to last, or specifically looking in on the part about water everywhere and not a drop to drink. Rime of the Ancient Mariner, written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And abstracting on the idea of the drinking water becoming tainted by either the construction of a pipeline, destroying certain aspects of the water table, or a leak in the pipeline that also harms the water table. And you could also abstract it into hurting the environment, the air, other things that are important as drinking water to say they're lost at sea, as that would be to them. So that would be one way to go through and do an abstracting exercise, and that'd be specifically with the construction of a pipeline. Another thing, kind of along that same vein, but analyzing perspectives more. Start out by having students read an excerpt from a book called Koviashevik by a guy named Sam Wright, who lived way up above the Arctic Circle in Alaska, and was an advocate against the building of the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline. He was the one, I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but he was the one that went into the meetings with the heads of the oil companies and legislators and stood up with a big elk skin robe on and said, who will speak for the elk? So taking kind of an environmental stance on things. So reading that, it's a fabulous book, and his stepdaughter is one of my wife's best friends, which is kind of cool for me. So going on reading that and analyzing the perspective of what he said, and then staging a mock debate. Well, I guess a regular debate. Having some students act as the corporations, their interests being represented, the interests of their shareholders, that kind of stuff, and other people being the residents of the area that the pipeline will go through, and environmentalists just in general. And stage a mock debate between a couple different groups, and the rest of the students will, once again, going back to touch on the journalism part of it, creating another piece for their newspaper, will be reporting on that debate. Also, the opportunity for an op-ed piece in there somewhere where they could write their opinion, maybe a letter to the editor as a concerned citizen or a proponent of the corporations being able to do this. Another part that we could delve into here to extend and refine knowledge would be, particularly as it pertains to the maritime industry, is the analyzing errors part. We look at a bunch of case studies of marine accidents. There's hundreds and hundreds of them, and they're a part of all the professional advancement courses that I've had to take to maintain my captain's license and do this stuff. So they're out there, and the analyses exist So we can come up with our own analysis and then look at what the experts have said, and the National Transportation Safety Board has said. Other things, there's a couple of famous ones. I mentioned the Exxon Valdez earlier. So there's plenty of areas where we can analyze the mistakes, analyze the errors to kind of come up with our own way to do it. And just to touch on the go back to the debate thing, as I'm looking at my worksheet here, constructing support will be an exercise in extending and refining knowledge, because say someone is not for the pipeline, however they are assigned to debate on behalf of the corporations or proponents, they will have to construct support for why this makes sense, even if they don't believe it. So it'll be to kind of, I think that kind of extends and refines and cements it in their brains to being forced to argue something that they don't necessarily believe in. I think that'll be And at this point, as we move from Dimension 3 into Dimension 4, what I might do is gauge, sit down, have a maybe one-on-one with some of the groups, or have the students, have an editing session with their newspaper. Maybe look back and do some peer review stuff, just to get a gauge on how they're doing, how they're feeling. Maybe just as simple having a discussion on Friday, be like, hey, how are you guys doing? Are you enjoying this? Do you have any questions? Do some sort of authentic assessment exercise. And if it seems like they're kind of getting bored with the whole area, and the fact that we did touch on some of the stuff in the Arctic with that pipeline up there, I figure it might be an opportunity to bring a little levity into the class and read some Robert Service. I think they're fun poems. I like them, but oftentimes have to do with life up in the Arctic, particularly Panning for Gold. But it applies to working on a pipeline, I think. Read the Cremation of Sam McGee, and just as a fun exercise, just read it, talk about it in class, give the students a chance to kind of clean their brains out and refresh. Be a good exercise on a Friday, so then when they come back in Monday, they're fresh to start back in on their newspaper project. As we move on to Dimension 4, where we will use knowledge meaningfully, we got a couple of different activities here, a couple of different things. One will be going back to look at the fluid dynamics experiments that we did, moving liquid from one container to another or one place to another, depending on which experiment, via pipes and pumps. So the experimental inquiry will be, what went wrong in the process, what went right in the process, going through, coming up with different ways that those problems could be dealt with after the fact, coming up with ways to prevent those facts, and that will kind of lead into a project on problem solving and invention. The problem-solving aspect would be more intellectual, where the students will come up with a list of best practices for, how to move petroleum from one place to another. I understand they'll have limited experience in this, but coming up with ways and considering some things that they didn't consider, like the personnel who are on board the boats or working in the terminals, how to keep them safe while this whole thing is happening, how to keep the environment safe, how to keep the investment. So there's a lot of different factors to think of. So coming up with best practices to safely move liquids from one place to another, petroleum products from one place to another, while keeping the equipment safe, the environment safe, and the people safe. As I was talking, so problem solving would come directly out of that experimental inquiry. And another thing that could come out of that experimental inquiry would be an invention. So we've looked at pipelines or transfer systems and trains and marine transportation of petroleum products, inventing a new way to do it. This will be a bit of a departure from the journalism part of it. It would be more of a scientific discovery, but once again, that's how our hypothetical class in a school that allows us to integrate between the classes will be helpful. Inventing a way to do this will a better way to do this will, I think, be a fruitful exercise that you can bring back the journalism aspect towards the end, where after the projects are presented, the students write a piece on that presentation, examining. They'll have a chance to question the scientists, the inventors. Question them, ask them questions about how it works, why it works, what if this happened, when did this happen, what, and move on from there. So coming up with a kind of like a press conference at the release of the invention of a new way to move petroleum from one place to another, whether it's a different kind of train car, different kind of pipeline, different kind of tug and barge, different kind of oil tanker, all sorts of different things. The invention, the experimenting, the invention can be pretty neat, and adding to the portfolio, the newspaper at the end of the unit will be the press conference. So they'll have to come up with interview questions, another aspect of journalism, the interview. So they'll be able to flesh out that sort of a lesson. I know we're packing a lot of stuff in here, but I think it's pretty fun, and I had a lot of time to think about this, so that's what we ended up with. Another aspect for Dimension 4 where I think we might try and squeak something in would be investigation. And the investigative journalism might be looking into the motives of the government and the corporations as they pertain to this most recent publicized Standing Rock reservation with that pipeline, and even the Keystone Access Pipeline, the Keystone XL Access Pipeline, I think it's called. Or no, Dakota Access Pipeline and Keystone XL. Two different pipelines, both recent with plenty of controversy surrounding them. So doing some investigative journalism into that, once again creating another piece to add to the newspaper at the end, which will once again act as a portfolio, which will be useful when it comes to assessing the whole thing. And finally, if we've done everything correctly between Dimensions 1 and 4, Dimension 5 will hopefully start to show itself as we move on into the peer review, writing a reflective piece, portfolio review, something along the lines of being able to look at what we've done, and then coming up with deadlines for the newspaper to come out. So certain pieces need to get to the student in the group that acts as the editor. The editor has to go through, make sure everything's grammatically correct, and they can obviously lean on the rest of their team to get this work done and learn some delegation, collaboration, which is the stuff of growth, I heard once. So what we'll do is, Dimension 5, I'll just talk about how some of these the aspects of our project will affect their critical thinking, creative thinking, and self-regulated thinking. The first of which is, in their critical thinking, being accurate and seeking accuracy. The whole point of journalism is to tell the truth to a wide audience. So they will need to be accurate. They'll need to check their sources, fact check. Maybe get back in touch with some of the people that they spoke to back in Dimension 2 with the field trip, to clarify some things. Clarity being the next one. When it comes to a news report or a newspaper article, you want to say what you're saying in a clear, concise manner, so your audience will be able to understand it. And if it's an op-ed piece, perhaps maybe change their mind to it. So you have to be clear to be clear in your message. Some of the activities, like maintaining an open mind when it comes to debating, perhaps debating something that you don't necessarily believe in, will help you or force you to maintain an open mind, or you won't do as well in the debate. Looking at the debate process as the soul of it rather than the position that you're taking in the debate. You have to maintain an open mind to get that done. Restraining impulsivity. That'll come with the when it comes to putting out the final product. It'll get close to the deadline. There'll be pressure, but through the idea of craftsmanship, the students will want to put out the same, put out their best work. So to restrain impulsivity, they'll have to submit something to the editor, self-edit, maybe peer review, go through the peer review process, and then come back and revise and edit and republish their work, so they're putting out the best possible thing. Once again, going back to the maintaining an open mind, taking a position when the situation warrants it, either in the debate process or when it comes to taking the op-ed, or if they have disagreements with the editor within the group as to which op-ed piece should be submitted to the final paper, the final group project. Which maybe their stance is deemed too hard one way or the other, and they need to take a stand and argue the merits of their position. And even if it doesn't make it in, if their arguments failed, they were still forced to go through the process of taking a stand for themselves, examining why they think that their work is valuable for the final piece. And even if it's not submitted, they will be faced with a little bit of failure, a personal failure that they will have to deal with and move on from, and that's another thing where that's central to my teaching platform, where I'd be there to help support them through that process if they needed it. And once again, along those same lines, we're responding appropriately to others' feelings and their level of knowledge, trying to choose which articles go in there. Everyone will have to debate and discuss and deal with someone's feelings and ideas about what they want included in the final paper. So I think that'll be a good exercise there. When it comes to creative thinking, that'll apply to some of the experimental things that we're doing. The initial experiment in Dimension 2 with procedural knowledge, and then the invention and problem solving activities that we do in Dimension 4. The ideas of persevering, pushing the limits of their knowledge and abilities, generate trust and maintain their own standards of evaluation. That's something that we'll once again do in the peer review process, and also in the when the students who have not done the invention are interviewing the inventors. They'll have to investigate, and the inventors will have to defend their thing. So it'd be, and obviously when it comes to inventing, students are generating new ways of viewing a situation outside the boundaries of standard convention. So they're taking something that isn't going away anytime soon. People are still going to put gas in their cars, so it needs to get from the ground to the gas pump some way. And we're figuring out what a best way might be to do that. So there's a conventional way of doing it and there's millions and millions of dollars tied up in the development of it and the exploration of it. So there's a lot of hard and fast convention that students will be trying to go against to come up with new and novel ways to get that done. So when it comes to the self-regulated thinking part of it, just the simple action of putting out a newspaper, meeting deadlines, monitoring their own thinking by looking at their op-ed pieces and making sure that they're just straight factual journalism just to get the truth out, is not leaning too far one way or the other. Planning appropriately to meet the deadlines, identifying and using necessary resources, books, other articles, the folks that they've interviewed, the people they talked to on the field trip. Those are all resources that they'll have at their disposal to try and figure out how to put out their best product. Through the peer review process, as well as me as the teacher periodically checking in on the progress of their newspaper and their news stories, and then checking up to make sure that they respond appropriately to the feedback that's given in those areas, making sure it's being edited and revised in the proper way, and then looking at their own actions and how effective they are in teaching this whole thing. So hopefully, through writing a newspaper, publishing a newspaper, a small newspaper will allow the students to move through all the dimensions of learning in a way. And there's some fun activities, the inventing and the problem solving, the experiments, the navigation problems. Those will kind of get people up and moving and touch on the different multiple intelligences. So we're not just sitting around doing one project over and over again. And maybe I can find some other Robert Service type poems to pepper in throughout there. As I'm looking back on this, it seems as though this might be a long unit and we could use a couple of breaks along the way. But that's when that whole checking in every once in a while, authentic assessment, getting to know the students, all that Dimension 1 stuff. Also, getting to know them and how they react to boredom or frustration will allow me to figure out how they're feeling, and figuring out when we need to take breaks and kind of deviate a little bit and do a fun thing. Maybe newspapers have crosswords, newspapers have cartoons, newspapers have all sorts of other things. So there's ways to brighten the mood, bring some uplifts into the whole process, so the students don't get all bogged down. Hope that worked, and I think this project wouldn't necessarily have to be petroleum transportation. It could be any sort of issue that deserves journalistic attention. So maybe I'll keep this one in my back pocket. See how it works in a real classroom someday. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all